Hello and welcome to Embrace the Podcast. My name is Courtney. It is my intention with this podcast to create a safe space where we can learn from one another and embrace life together. In today's episode, I sit down with my very dear friend Paige Radice, and we talk about the topic of masculine and feminine energy. We discuss all of Paige's lessons around this topic and how we can explore and feel into these energetics in our own lives. Let's dive right in. Hello, and welcome to the podcast. Paige, it's great to have you on.
Thank you
I'm just
so
going to
much,
do a little
Courtney.
intro for you so that everybody who's listening knows who you are. So Paige is someone that I feel very blessed to have in my life. You'll soon find out that you don't need to listen to her speaking for long before you realize how talented she is. And I swear she's got a connection straight to source, and her wisdom and channelings are honestly next level. So we're excited to have you here. She frequently blows me away with how eloquently she words things. And it's often the hard-hitting, complicated ideas too that you're telling us about, which is amazing. Paige has her own successful tutoring business. She has run multiple manifestation courses, and she also has her own podcast called The Soul-Led Life, where she explores wisdoms, musings, and channelings on how to design, magnetize, and live a soul-led life. This kind of feels like a full circle moment, Paige. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I was one of your first guests, and you're my very first guest. So
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. The full loop cycle just goes to show that there's such a natural cycle of things, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, amazing. So I wanted to start out with how we met, just to give some context as to what our whole friendship is sort of based on. So how about you dive into that, and I'll jump in if I want to add anything.
Absolutely. I love this story, and I constantly retell it all the time. First off, thank you for having me on the podcast. I forgot to say that. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, me too. I've literally had this in my calendar all week, and I've just been waiting, and I'm so excited. So how me and Courtney met, we both went into a manifestation course by Catherine Zenkina, who is Manifestation Babe on Instagram. She's quite well known in the manifestation space. And we had to, well, we didn't have to, but we were encouraged to create an accountability group of sorts. And it was so interesting, and we talk about this in retrospect, but so many people wanted to be part of that accountability group. And we had this big Telegram chat with just people from all over the world. And we had a Zoom link call, and only 3 of us ended up jumping on, which was myself, Courtney, and then our other mutual friend, Olivia. And ever since then, it started off as accountability calls for a course, but quickly got off track and was not about that anymore. It was just about friendships and catching up and, I suppose navigating the journey of evolution and self-growth and all that stuff. And it was just very, 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 very nice to have, I suppose, a group of people to come back to, and especially when you are on this journey, it can be a bit isolating when you change around people that you might have known for a long time. So and then we had our first meetup as well in Sydney. Courtney came from New Zealand, which was amazing.
Yes, 23 highlights.
Yes, we actually got to physically hug in person. But honestly, it didn't even really feel that different, because I think all the conversations we've had on these catch-ups for the past over a year now have just been so deep, so intimate that it hasn't even really been a barrier, I don't think. Did I miss anything?
No.
I feel that's a good summary.
No, I feel like you're already showing how amazing of a speaker you are. Perfect summary. Yeah, I totally agree though. And I feel like female friendships are so special, especially when you're diving into this stuff. That feminine connection, which I feel like we're going to dive into a bit in this episode.
Yeah.
So my first question for you, you're actually prepared for, because it's the life lessons question. So for anyone listening, Paige and I unbeknowingly recorded very similar podcast episodes. It will have been, for me, the episode that comes out before this episode, which will be 23 lessons in 23 years. And Paige is a year younger than me, so she's done her 22 lessons in 22 years version. And yeah, recording the podcast, I don't know about you, but it's made me, I've been asking people in my life, like my parents and my nana and, you know, friends and stuff, you know, what's your big life lessons? And it's really interesting seeing how different people interpret that and like what they say. Because some people go super deep. Some people sort of focus on like one little thing, and some people sort of just joke around with it. Which is
they're
cool.
like, what life lessons? We were supposed to be learning something.
Yeah. So yeah, I've given you some time to reflect, so I'm really interested in hearing about what you think is your sort of standout life lesson for you at the moment.
Yeah.
In your 22 years.
My 22 years. So this was kind of a hard one to boil down into one that I wanted to speak about, because obviously if you are on any sort of personal development, self-growth, anything, which I've pretty much been on, like I'd say since high school, there's a lot of stuff that piles up. But if I had to sum it to one thing, I'm going to need to explain it. But my life lesson is that self-growth is not a journey of ascension, as in like going up and climbing, but it's a journey of descension. That's my biggest life lesson. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that, because
do please, I'm so excited.
I feel like this needs some more context around it. I don't know about, I mean, I assume if you're listening to like this podcast, you are interested in, you know, bettering yourself and like higher self stuff and, you know, becoming the best version of yourself that you can be. And one thing that I have noticed is that the beginning of my self-growth journey was very focused on like reaching and getting out almost of my body. Very fascinated with stuff like 5D dimensions, and it was all striving, and becoming someone that it's almost like this illusion of perfectionism comes into the self-help space, where you feel like you need to become somebody in order to receive what you want. So it's always just this striving, reaching, going higher and higher and higher. And what I have actually found that has been way more rewarding is to focus on like returning back, authenticity, coming back to my feminine core, which I'll get into what that means like later today, I'm sure. And just to like visualize this, like if you literally use your hand and you like sort of hover your hand like above your head, I feel like the journey starts there. Yeah, Courtney, go ahead and do with me for those watching the video recording.
Yes, can turn along.
Yeah, let me visualize it. It normally starts around here, where there is like some sort of tap into, I have a higher purpose, or I'm here to fulfill something bigger, and it's like just outside of you. Then what I find naturally happens is you go a bit down and you're like in your mind. So like, what are the mindset blocks that I have? What are my thoughts and attitudes towards things? What is like the conditioning? It's very like mental, because unless you clear this, like you're not going to be able to get into deeper stuff. So then it goes here. Then what happens is, just to continue visualizing, you sort of come down to your third eye, right? Let's say, which is like I'm very spiritual. So it's like your spiritual access point. And because you've cleared away so much mental stuff, that becomes much more potent. And then now, because you've got this foundation where everything that like society wants for you, you've sort of deconstructed. If you then tap into like your heart, so we're like descending down, that's really like a place where you start tuning into like truly what does my heart want, and like these deeper embodiments of things like love and abundance. And then if we keep going down and down and down, which I have found, especially as like a feminine being, you then start tapping into very like somatic practices. So you'll use things like breath work, or like very intentional movement, very somatic modalities to try and like clear trauma and return back to yourself, I suppose. And then you hit that like womb point where it's like, oh, from here I'm like very tapped into like my authentic self, that there's no longer striving. It's like once I get there, I'm in like a place of very unlimited like potential and creation, that I actually don't need to strive outside of myself to get there. I just needed to come back and like return. So that's what I mean when I say self-growth is not a journey of ascension and going outside of your body. It's like channeling yourself back down, at least in my view.
Yeah, I love that. Even just listening to you like go through those steps and like visualizing it in a way, it just made me feel so much more grounded, even you just speaking about it.
I noticed that too,
And
like talking through it.
yeah, that's really powerful. It actually reminded me of recently I've been thinking about just, because I do so many different journaling practices and writing for posts and that sort of thing. And I'm like, imagine if I just, it could be a book, all of the stuff that I've written.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I'm going to start a book. Like, what would I call it? And there's one book that's already out and it's like all the things that I know about. Have you heard of that book?
I think
I think I'm getting it slightly wrong. Oh no, it's everything that I know about. And then it's like boys, money. And so they fill out like different chapters like that. And I was like, that's a really good one, but damn, it's taken. But then I was thinking about it and I was like, I want to call it like remembering or everything that I've remembered, because in my spiritual journey, when I have a big sort of moment of like realization or whatever, it doesn't feel like I've learned it the first time. It feels like it's something that I'm remembering because it makes so much sense to me, like in my core already. It feels like it's something that I'm remembering. So yeah, I thought of that when you started talking as well. Do you sort of relate to that?
Yes, absolutely. It's like when there's a lot of teachings and spaces inside of like these realms that we're talking about. And sometimes you'll hear something and it doesn't like resonate in the same way. But other times you hear something absolutely. And it's like you just like unlocked something that was sleeping, but it was there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. And I did a masterclass recently and I wrote a message to the like teacher and I literally said to her, like, it feels like I've had something ancient but dormant, like sitting in my body for like my whole life. And you just like lit a match and it just like fired up. But it's not that it was never there. It's just like being remembered.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely resonate with that 100%.
Yeah, that's so cool. By any chance, was that your sort of feminine masculine masterclass that you did, or?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, that's a perfect transition then.
It is. Yes.
Because I wanted my next thing that I was going to ask you about was the whole feminine masculine energy sort of trend that's been going around. I don't know if you've noticed. Maybe it's just because we're into it, but it's all over my TikTok and YouTube and social medias. So it seems like a big thing that everyone's talking about, and I know that you've done a lot of energy work around that yourself. So yeah, I was hoping that we could dive into that. So sort of how would you describe this whole energy movement to anyone who's sort of like, what are you talking about right now?
Let me create some distinctions first. So absolutely, I have seen it popping up on my TikTok as well and on Instagram. And one thing that I just want to say in terms of the whole feminine energy movement is it's less of a trend and more of something that is naturally built into us, but is at times being capitalized on and turned into a trend. And I just want to make it very clear that this is like not a trend. This is something that it's just like the basis of how like life force energies work, how creations work. Like this isn't something that like is a marketing ploy. And something that I have noticed is on TikTok especially, a lot of the teachings are being taught for the sake of achieving something versus like returning. So, for example, I've seen so many videos on TikTok about here's how to get into your feminine energy so you like captivate a man, or like here's how to use your siren energy. I don't know if you've heard that term, but like people say here's how to use your like siren archetype to get this outcome in a situation. And when we like dive into what the energies actually are, that is like there's so many inversions in how it's being taught. You have to be very discerning about who you listen to in this space. And like me, like wholeheartedly, I can say I probably have about 3 women online that I fully trust to teach me these teachings because it is a buzzword. And yeah, I just like encouraging discernment. That's my view on the whole trend thing, and it's not something that I've embodied perfectly, and I have shared this with you, Courtney, that it is something I want to speak about, but I always want to put that disclaimer of it's something I'm learning, and I'm not going to stand here and be like, here's all these tactics and like this 10-step checklist to get into your feminine energy, because that just totally goes against what the teachings are. That's my view on the trend. It's not a trend.
Yeah. And something that I thought of as you were saying that is it sort of speaks to the collective as well. Like if you've got the belief that we're like all connected and sort of all one energy, and you know, what we do in our life affects the collective, then even just one person. So it kind of makes sense that a lot of women nowadays are, or at the moment, seem to be focusing back on this. Yeah. It is, yeah, as you say, the whole doing your feminine or being in your feminine to attract a man or to do something, to me that almost seems like it is being in your masculine because you're like wanting an outcome.
Strategic. Yeah, it's so strategic. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So it's sort of against the point, really. So on this topic, I wanted to ask, because there are a lot of like experts out there, and I feel as though it's it's very tricky to navigate, because it's great that everyone wants to sort of share their experience. But I love how you approach it about, you know, I'm just exploring this stuff myself, and, you know, might share some of your journey. But I feel like it's really clear to your followers that they're coming along with you on that. And yeah, it really opens you up for a lot of like beauty and vulnerability, which I love. But yeah, I feel like there's a lot of projection that goes on in this space, particularly around feminine, masculine. And are there any particular things that you've heard, or like strains of the TikTok trend or whatever, sorry to be labeling it trend, that you like can think of on the spot that you would sort of disagree with in particular, or have your own stance against?
Yes. Okay, the first one I'm going to say might ruffle some feathers. So just as a preface, one thing I always say is like triggers are treasures. So if anything I say in this conversation triggers you, just like tune into why and don't have an extremist attitude about what I talk about. One thing that has been a phrase that floats around a lot is divine feminine. And like, here's how to embody your divine feminine energy. And there is an element of like divine feminine that actually goes against like everything biologically that like the feminine is meant to be. And this concept of like divine feminine energy, when you say you are divine, you say you have your entire reality under control, essentially, and that you get to manipulate and I was going to say co-create because I'm so used to saying that word now. You get to manipulate and create everything exactly perfectly as you want it because you have like divine will. A term that I think is much more like in alignment physiologically with what the feminine is and energetically is like the devotional feminine. So like whether that is being in devotion to like your vision, but also like being in devotion to say like other people and like partnership, being in devotion to like the connection that you have to source, whether that's like universe or it's God for you or whatever it is. To me, it's like you honor the fact that you are a human being and you don't have the total power to fix absolutely everything like in your reality. There is an element of like surrender there. So I think the divine femininity, it's sort of like another trend that I've noticed is this move out of like boss babe. That term is sort of getting a bit like demonized now. Yeah, it's getting a bit stale. I've actually heard girl moss, which I love a lot. I think that's great. Like I just want to lay on the moss all day and just be in a forest. But the girl boss energy is just being transferred onto the divine feminine like energy, which is like you're the boss, but you just do it with more pretty feminine aesthetic, essentially. That's what I see as like the transfer between the two things. And yeah, I feel like another illusion is that feminine energy is more of a outward expression versus like how you behave day to day. And don't get me wrong, like the pink colors and the pretty like frilly dresses, they make me feel feminine. I'm not saying they don't, but like true feminine embodiment is not like outwardly how you express yourself. It's very much about like your vulnerability, like your energetic openness, your ability to like surrender and submit, which is edgy. And we can talk about that later. But like it's grounded more in those abstract things. And don't get me wrong, like those are enhancements, but that's not feminine energy per se. Yeah, they're the main things that come to mind when I think of some of the things floating around in this space. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And how do you feel like this all relates to, because I feel as though this has a massive impact on our like dating decisions and all of that. Like I know for me personally, there's been moments where I was like, I can't text him because that's being in my masculine, which I've since unlearned. But yeah, I feel as though, yeah, we're in our 20s, both of us, and probably most of the people listening. And so, yeah, we're exploring these dynamics and these energies, and I think we're all discovering what we do and don't like. And yeah, so what have you explored around that topic, and how are you incorporating it into your life or dating life, or yeah?
Yeah. Well, what I want to actually do first is let's just define what feminine and masculine like is first off, because I think for some people it's, you know, literally just, oh, the image of a woman is like feminine energy, and then like the image of a muscly guy is like masculine energy, but it goes much deeper than that. And I think we should define it first before we talk about how it translates into dating. So the feminine like energetics are very much about like openness, being able to like receive, gonna like send like wink winks through like the camera here, but think about like physical bodies being a reflection of like internal energy. Being able to be in the present moment. What's another word? Like their expressions of like love, very non-linear. That's like feminine energy. Whereas masculine energy is much more like direct, penetrative in all the senses of the word, is normally related to like truth and direction, like power and authority. So it's much more like, and I would say like feminine is more like water, I suppose, if we want to like translate it to that. When you were talking about the dating, so if we move from like that space of defining them, when we speak about like dating and it's like, oh, I don't get to text him first because then I'm like in my masculine, which is like such an illusion. As soon as you're in the whole like I should or I should not, or I've been told I'm not supposed to do this, you're actually in your like, it's not the act itself that's putting you in your masculine. It's the mental like hyper thinking and strategy and like trying to manipulate the situation that is actually like the masculine component. This is how I see it. Like the feminine is so grounded in the presence and into like her body and how she feels that she will respond to what feels good and what feels grounded. So if there is a moment where you're like, like I really want to reach out to this person, and I like tune into like the energy behind that, and it's genuinely from a place of like sincere excitement and like responding to my energy, that is not in your masculine. It has nothing to do like with the action itself. It's like the energy and the intention behind it. Yeah, to me that's not a masculine energy. Versus if I'm like constantly texting first because I believe that if I let go of my control mechanisms that there will be no action on the other like end of the spectrum, and I'm coming at it from an attitude of I get to make things predictable because I know he usually responds, so if I respond now I'm going to get back that like validation that I want. That is more not really like embodying your feminine. It's all about like feeling body based. How does it feel? How many times could I say feel in that sentence? Yeah. That's my view on the dating aspects. And one thing I will say is like none of this this is much harder to like embody in a dynamic until you start like stripping away a lot of like conditioning that is inhibiting you from embodying it just on like a personal level. There is like so much conditioning around the feminine not being safe. There is so much conditioning around like hating men, which is inherently going to push away like a masculine dynamic if that's what you want, that you need to deal with that. Not like completely to the point that you're like perfect and then you can go in a dating situation, because I don't believe that's the way to go. But there needs to be an element of like personal, journey and transition around this and inquiry, I guess. Does that sort of answer your question? Did you have any like specific...
And there's a couple of things I do want to dive into there, but I feel like something that really stood out to me, which I feel as though might be one of the things that when you see the stuff on social media is like coming across the wrong way, is I think that we do get caught in action. And that's, I think that's with a lot of things, like we think that our actions are like what define or wait, sorry, I think my thing's just gone off.
Your mic good?
Oh yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay. All good.
Where was I? Oh yeah, we think that it's the action. Yeah. Whereas it's not. It's the energy that we're in when we take the action. So there's action involved, but the action doesn't determine, what energy we're in.
Exactly. Yeah. And like there's like different elements to how like a feminine being takes action, how like a woman takes action versus how a man takes action. And when we think about like the action in the lenses of like the feminine, the masculine is very like hunt, go after, that sort of action. Whereas like feminine action is more like devoting to like present moment and learning to master like her emotions and like how she can hold sensation. That's like a very different kind of action that is much more focused, like I said about the dissension before, in the body rather than like and like going out and seeking something. And there's this person that I follow who says it really nicely, and they're like, the woman always like creates space for men to take action and be able to pursue something. And it was this analogy of like dropping the napkin, and then like the man picks it up. It's not that there's like no action involved. It's just that your action has like a different tone and like flavor than like a man's action would. Yeah,
that makes sense. One of the things I wanted to dive into there was about sort of that independence, or that and that feeling safe in your feminine, because I know that you've done a lot of work around that, and you even mentioned doing some work around that before you or while you're in the dating scene. So could you just dive into that a bit more and potentially even share what that may look like, or how we can practically, in a way, if it's possible, apply some of this stuff in our lives to take away after this episode?
Yeah. The how do we do this? Yeah, it's like everyone always wants to know, like, okay, but how? So yeah, my journey around this is I have always been a very deep romantic ever since I was a kid. Like, love stories have always been like my favorite form of like entertainment, like the tragedies. I love them. And as I was, sort of like towards like the end of high school, I was very determined, very in my masculine, and I did get what I want because I was very good at like strategizing and doing all that stuff. But I noticed that my interactions with men were very far from these like love stories that I had watched growing up when I was younger.
Funny, mine have been like that too.
Yeah, and not in the sense that I encountered, really bad situations, but like bad is a relative term, and like trauma is a relative term. I'll just say that. I think that trauma is, I heard this phrase, like too much, too little, or too fast creates trauma. And that's like very different for everyone.
That makes sense.
So yeah, just like based on a few things from childhood, a few like abandonments, I noticed that I started to have a bit of a skewed view of like the masculine. I've actually been very blessed with an excellent like dad who I think really embodies all the masculine principles amazingly. These abandonments have come from like other places. But yeah, I just noticed that the sort of like men that I wanted, the like knight aspects, chivalry, there was not a safe space around me for men to actually express that, because I would either like deflect it, launch on them and attack them for even like showing it, or like for assuming I couldn't do something myself. And I was very much like swept up at the end of high school in very strong like feminist teachings. I don't know if anyone has heard of the book Women Don't Know You Pretty before. It was like a feminist book that got really popular a few years ago. Have you heard of it, Connie?
Yes, I have. I haven't read it, but
Yeah.
I remember seeing it on everyone's stories like, I'm reading
Yeah.
this.
Women Don't Know You Pretty. And I bought the book, was a huge advocate for the book, would pass it to all my friends. And there are maybe elements in there that still resonate, but very small elements.
Mm.
And I just noticed, like, at the end of the day, what do I most deeply want in my life? And one of the biggest things is like a very strong family unit and like deep partnership with a masculine man. And that may not be everybody's desire, but what I have noticed is the more I've spoken to like other women about this in our 20s too, after a bit of like setting up the scene and telling people like it's okay to have these desires, it comes out of the floodgates of like people's mouths. It's what they like want, or at least a lot of people that
Mm.
I've connected with.
Yeah,
Anyways, so yeah.
I agree. Totally.
Yeah. And it's funny because you're so in these conversations that I've had with both men and women, but like if we're speaking about women right now, I've noticed that there's this tagline that comes out before ever expressing a desire in this space, which is, I know it's really bad to say, or I know it's really bad to want, but I want this. And usually it's, I want a masculine guy, or I want a guy who like takes control, or I want someone that I feel like I can just like let go with. But then there is that tagline which shows you that on some level you're like shameful about having that desire. So I started to
Mm.
notice that when I was doing, desire visualizations, this was what I wanted, but understanding how belief systems and things work, everything in my system was coded to hate men. Like culturally, like friends I had had in high school, there's just this almost like attack, I suppose, and this hyper independent attitude. And yeah, so I essentially
Mm.
did a course called Trust His Lead, which I can wholeheartedly recommend. If you want to DM me like on Instagram, I'm sure Courtney will leave like my thing in the show
Absolutely.
notes. Yeah, I'd be happy to like direct you to that course and like the teachers that I have discerned as being very embodied in this space. But I essentially took that course. It was about 6 weeks initially, the videos, but I took it very slow because I made sure that every like week's content I went and practiced it. And yeah, that was the big like pivotal turning point. But I was actually going through some journals the other day. That was in 2022, so like last year that I did that course. And I was going through some journals and I noticed that I had started writing like love letters to men in general as a collective in 2020. So this journey has actually been a lot longer than I initially thought it was. It's been like seeding
That's so
fruit,
cool.
which I love, that I looked back and saw that. But yeah, I would say on a like tactical level, I think it's really important to have a teacher or a mentor that's not
Yeah.
some TikTok creator who's waiting to like hit 100K or something like that. Be really like discerning about this. And you can like feel into, your body is so powerful. You can feel into when something feels like genuinely grounded in like good intent versus trying to become TikTok famous. Like you can feel it.
Yeah.
So yeah, course is very powerful. Some other tactical things that I would probably recommend is just getting back in touch with like nature and your body. So if we think about like feminine and masculine as the archetypes, feminine is like the earth, masculine is the sun. So if you go get in touch with the earth, you're immediately getting in touch like with that like feminine body, I suppose. In terms of the hyper independence, because you mentioned that, right? The independence
Yes.
part. Yeah. Okay, so one thing I do also want to say about this is it's never going to feel comfy, right? Because you, at least at the start, I suppose, and there is always going to be like an edge where the old self who wants to like control and micromanage and strategize and predict every situation is going to try and launch in. But something that I have really started doing that I noticed was a very persistent behavior is reducing my correction of men and allowing myself to be corrected. And that's like very edgy, like when you hear that, because you're like, oh, there's this term like mansplaining. Oh my God, don't like mansplain things to me. I'm not speaking about it in that respect, but like allowing myself to be called out on like my bullshit by men. A really good example of this is I was on a like date with a guy and we were walking through like this park and he essentially said that he just wanted to like stroll around the city and like he just wanted to speak and all this stuff and that we would find a restaurant. And I got my phone out and started like trying to plan and being like, oh, like what's the nearest restaurant like around here? He was like, put the phone away, like trust me, like I know what I'm doing, it's okay, just like enjoy being like in the park. And like in that moment, like little things like that, my whole body is like, but I can do it like myself. Like, why are you telling me to like put my phone away? But the reality is, like, when you receive that sort of like masculine correction, and there's like a lot of nuance around this, but when you receive that like gracefully, the whole desire of wanting to be led and wanting to be like taken care of actually just like unfolds when you like let go of all those little
Yeah.
control mechanisms. That not correcting or like if let me restart that. If there is like a man around me who has a certain way that he wants to do something and that's not the way that I usually did it, or I think that like my way is like 10 times better, but it's not really. It's just a different way of getting to the same situation. Learning to just like surrender to like a different route of getting there. That's another thing that I noticed has really like, yeah, relaxed out some of that like hyper independence, because the reality is like it always works out in the end. This could be something as simple as like your dad and driving the car and like you're with your family or something and you're going to a restaurant and you're like, why didn't you turn right? Like something as simple as that, when he's just like going another way that is also going to get you to the restaurant. Learning to just like acknowledge those moments where it's allowing like a masculine to lead if that's actually what you want. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
The other things
And I
coming to
feel like
mind.
that is sort of a skill in itself as well, because all of these topics are very nuanced. Like, you
Yeah,
don't want to take it to the
deeply.
other extreme where, somebody says do this and you're like, okay, I'm in my feminine.
Okay, exactly. Yeah, the word here is like whenever you speak about this stuff, the core word is like discernment. And
Mm.
I love there's this like analogy that one of my teachers in this space says, which is like in order for like a rose to bloom, she has to have thorns. So like there still has to be some level of boundary and like a protection set up of who do you accept leadership from? Who do you like surrender to? Like not just anyone. You still have to
No.
like, yeah, tune into, are you doing this with like men who have your best like interests at heart? Truly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I suppose if you are around like a truly masculine man in like the healthy masculine sense, then they will have your best interest at heart, and they've got that,
Yeah.
sort of protecting, like guiding safeness with them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I feel
Yeah.
as though it's like very clear that there's a massive clash between what a lot of women want deep down and sort of
Mhm.
how we are conditioned.
Mm.
Because I totally agree with you. Whenever I speak to most of my friends, I actually can't even think of anyone that would disagree with me, but about what they would want in a man and like what kind of man. It's always sort
Mm.
of the stereotypical like sort of protector, you know,
Mm.
can throw me around type of,
Yeah.
respectfully.
It's like I want to be like railed, but like romantically. I saw that quote once, and I was like, "Yeah, I get it."
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I feel like all women get that. But then at the same time, we've got this hyper independence, and we're like, a woman can do everything a man can do, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, we can, but do we want to? And is that what we actually feel comfortable, doing?
Yeah.
Something.
And there's,
Oh, you go?
Okay.
Another big thing that I've noticed with all of this,
Mm.
with some of my friends, is like the language around men. Because when you say like there's this whole I hate men and like F men, there is definitely like a side of TikTok that you can very easily end up on. And even it just comes up so casually and like when we're talking about boys, because obviously we're in our 20s, we're single, so we're dating, and sometimes things don't go as planned, and I feel as though we just so quickly go to like, I hate men, like screw all men, like I'm gonna be single forever, and that type of like language and sort of outlook, even if it is in jest, it is still quite damaging, because I feel as though it makes, you're sort of labeling men as these bad things for doing something that you probably did yourself. Like when we get ghosted or something, it sucks, but at the same time, I know my girl mates who have ghosted people, so it's the same.
Yeah. There's the like term for that is like emasculation, which it's so subtle. It's insane how subtle it is. And I'm not like, when I like sit here and have these conversations, I'm not saying that like there are no like female problems or anything like that. But like the reality is that I'm mostly focused on like what can I change and like what do I want and how am I like coding myself to like effortlessly attract that. And yeah, the emasculation, like just some ways I suppose to start thinking like about it is when you're like in conversation and you have like a group of friends and there are like guys and there are girls, are there like little like digs and remarks that are made at a guy, say for example, who like voices his opinion on like a particular like perspective? Are there moments where you sort of like almost like turn down behavior that's trying to like be chivalrous because you think it's an attack on like your ability to do something? That is like on some level emasculating because you're dropping down the likelihood of that masculine like behavior being offered to you in the future. And I think that the reality is like someone who is a man who is grounded in his like masculinity, like truly, is not going to waste his like time or energy on someone who is like repelling what he is offering. Because if we think about like what, at least from what I've learned and from what I've spoken to men about, and I've asked multiple men this question, like purpose and respect is like the lifeblood of like a masculine man. Like it's so important. And if they have energy that they need to direct to a purpose that they're trying to fulfill, and they want to like receive respect at the same time, and they're very grounded and like genuine about this, they're just not going to waste their time on somebody who is repelling everything that they're like offering. So I would say like kind of hard to hear, but if you feel like you are constantly almost like there are like good guys that you're encountering who you think are very embodied in their masculine, but then they're disappearing. Not saying like it's your fault, but just like use that as a point of inquiry to just ask, is there anything I'm doing that's like actively repulsing like the masculine? Or that's like shaming them when they express it. I think that's like very important. And we spoke about this the other day, Courtney, but like I think emasculation doesn't just have to happen with like a man in the room, but it can also just happen between like girls speaking. And like for me, I know that a lot of like things that I hear, not often because they're not really the circles that I'm in anymore, but like let's say we go to a party or something and there's, people that I don't know and I'm like meeting them. I remember I was at this party a few months ago and there was this girl talking about how like a man had tried to help her with something. And she was basically saying like, oh, guys suck. Like it would be way better like if he never offered or like da 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 da. And she was just really like shitting on them essentially. And like in the moment, like that feels way out of integrity for me. And one of the other life lessons on my version of the episode is that integrity doesn't always feel good in the moment, but it always feels good like later. And I think that calling out like emasculation gently, you don't need to like be savage about this or like attack. That just like, defeats the whole point.
No.
But like just like gently inviting people to like question, yeah, is really powerful. And it's important whether there is like a guy in the room or not. Yeah. And if you just have like open conversations with men about this and you create genuinely like a safe space, like your body and your frequency can communicate so much. And they'll be able to sense if you're like coming at them with these sort of questions from like sincere curiosity or because you're waiting for them to say something wrong and like launch an attack. They'll be able to like feel into that. But yeah, when you ask like men, what makes you feel like a man? Or, you know, like what do you say like want in a woman, or what feels really inspiring for you to actually protect and like look after? Yeah, just be like, listen to what they say. And it's like very surprising. And there are a lot of inherently good masculine men out there, but your field is not going to be open to even seeing them if, yeah, you're in this space of shaming men. It's just like immediate repulsion. Yeah. I can't even remember what your question was. I just went so like, what was the question? Did I answer the question?
I don't even remember. I was just like really
was.
listening to that. I think I was just sort of previously speaking about, you know, the whole I hate men, like, or like just the whole expectation that like it's gonna go bad. And, you know, law of attraction, magnetism, everything. Like, if that's what you expect, then that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But also, that makes total sense about, yeah, if you are radiating that energy, that's felt like the wrong word, radiating.
Yeah.
Feel like a heater.
True.
Yeah, then you're not going to attract the kind of man because, you know, the feminine, I suppose, is about receiving. And if you can't receive that energy, then it'll go somewhere where it will be received.
Yeah. And like one thing I would just challenge you, like a little exercise as well, if you're listening to this and you're like, maybe like if I'm being honest, there's like a few emasculation traits that I have, which like I'm saying this because I had like a million of them and slowly I've, you know, let them fall away. One thing I would really encourage you to do is just like shift your focus. When you spend an entire day moving about in the world focused on like the goodness of men and like the men that are actually doing things for you, like it is actually limitless. You just are not noticing it. It's not on your radar right now. And it could be something as simple as you're like commuting and like a guy stops and lets you go first. It could be something as simple as like maybe your dad tries to help you with something and he organizes it in the background. And normally you just be like, oh, like thanks for doing that. No, that's like masculine provision right there. Just making like bigger moments out of little things is really helpful too.
Yeah. I think even from the like calls that we've had with Olivia as well, I've sort of done that recently. And yeah, if I ever do find myself in these conversations where it's like, I hate men, I sort of do try to like be like, no, you know, like redirecting, like they are good. And I don't know, I find it quite, what's the word I'm looking for? Quite like reassuring that, because I genuinely have this belief that there are good men out there and that one day I'm going to find my perfect or like, you know, match. If I exist, then he exists. That's what I've heard one of my favorite creators say recently, which is really
I love that.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was just gonna say, I think that there's also this element of like we somehow expect like the perfect guy to show up without sometimes doing any like work on ourselves too. I've noticed that, where it's like, oh, he's just going to appear, and we sort of like hold other people to a higher standard sometimes than we like hold ourselves. Yeah, just something to like pull up there. I was going to say something else, but I lost it. So I'll return back if it arises again.
Yeah, I think I've heard recently, although no, actually for a while, about how you know, you want this perfect man, but are you the perfect energy that matches that? I've sort of heard that that concept, but recently that I've heard someone else I can't remember, this is just in my brain, I can't remember who said it. I heard someone say, not exact, you don't have to like be the mirror of that person, but you know, who, like, what's the energy that they would want to be receiving from the partner. I feel like I'm not describing that very well, but
no, I fully like, okay, so this is a huge misconception when you come from the manifestation space and you dip your toes into like union and like polarized relationships and that sort of stuff. We have been told that like in order for you to attract a certain person, you need to become that person yourself. And there are like
yeah,
tenets of that are true. So like rather than thinking of, okay, if I'm wanting like the perfect man, do I have the perfect energy? I would shift that to, if I want devoted energy, like, am I devoted myself? Because the reality is like no one is ever going to be like perfect. There's a human element here. But yeah, with the whole thing about like attracts like, when we think about like feminine and masculine, if you have two magnets, like if you ever did this in high school and you put the same ends next to each other, being like the plus and the plus, they will repel like away from each other. So there is like a different like nuance here when we start talking about this with partnership, because it's less about becoming what you want to attract. Because if I want to attract a masculine guy, like that principle sort of goes out the window of I'm
yeah,
not really, I shouldn't be in my masculine, because the reality is, if we think about, if you're watching the video, but like if we think about like the feminine as sort of like a chalice that can like receive, and then masculine is like the sword. If you have like two swords just like hitting each other, there is there's no way of like, at least in like this sort of dynamic, those two people truly being able to feel each other. So like for me, rather than looking at this as I need to become my masculine if I want like a masculine guy, that's just going to put me at war with a masculine guy. And like it's just going to be two swords fighting with each other all the time. Rather than doing that, like I would think about instead, are you creating like an energetic space as a woman for you to like receive the kind of thing you're attracting? And that doesn't necessarily mean becoming the energy of the thing that you want to attract, which, yeah, when you've grown up on manifestation principles, yeah, there are nuances to this when it comes to like partnership, I believe. Yeah.
yeah.
At least the polarized partnership that maybe people are looking for.
Yes. Oh my, I loved that answer. I feel like that was perfectly what I was trying to say, but way
Yeah.
worded way better than I could have.
Because I've heard a very similar like idea before. Yeah. I feel like we've
Yeah,
seen the
maybe
same
it was
thing
us who
somewhere.
was talking about it the other day.
Yeah. Maybe we just like referenced ourselves and we can't even remember. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that's another important thing to consider is the whole having space for things. Like if you I sort of was practicing this the other day, like if I want to have, you know, this provider in my life or whatever, then like, do I have space for that? And I'm like, no, I'm so rigid. Like when I make my breakfast, I'm like, it has this many ingredients. And if my parents are like, can I have some? I'm like, no, I need to make a whole nother one, you know, like type of thing. And I like make my,
Yeah.
you know, lunch. And I'm like, wow, I really have like no room in my life for a romantic relationship. And, you know, I'm not particularly searching for one right now. So that doesn't bother me so much. I'm very much focused on myself. So I like spending all of my energy on myself. But I feel like when I come to the point where I'm like, right, I'm ready to receive this, I will need to change some of the things that I do. Because, you know, some of my, you know, just how I go about everyday life. Yeah, if I was in a partnership, it would be very one-sided.
Yeah. Yeah. Space. And like, I mean, I'm assuming, yeah, people listening are probably already on this like track of, you know, like self-awareness and stuff like that. But yeah, it's not that there needs, like I said before, there doesn't need to be perfect conditions for this to like, materialize. But yeah, absolutely. Like it's not, I think we live, something that I've at least noticed is in the past, every time I wrote down scripts about the kind of like man or partnership that I wanted, it was I want, I want, I want, I want, I want, I want, I want. Like this is what you must have. Versus now, I've noticed that my scripts have sort of like, not that I don't even believe at this point that I can like script a partner into my life. That's like a whole nother conversation.
Mm.
But one thing that it has shifted to is like I show up like as this, or I like devote myself in this way, or I serve in this way. And it's become much more like what is my behavior versus these like, yeah, checklisty things of you must act like this. Because the reality is I can't control, but someone who I think is going to be like a good match for me is probably going to be able and like be able to appreciate those things that I'm offering. So I'm focusing more on the offering as opposed to like what is being delivered. Yeah, in terms of the ticking the boxes and creating space. I think that's a cool way to also make space. Yeah, thinking about what you can offer in that partnership and then embodying that like day to day.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Ooh, I feel like I've got so many things I can take away from this episode.
Yes, I know. It's been such a good conversation. No,
As
yeah,
a way to sort of close things, I feel like you sort of said this at the beginning of the episode, but we've probably potentially ruffled a few feathers
yeah.
with the whole masculine feminine energy thing.
Mhm.
And we've also spoken a bit about the whole feeling into your body and feeling what feels right to you. Is there any sort of closing notes that you would share on either of those?
Let me like tune in, see what comes up.
Or just any channelings or closing thoughts?
Mhm. I think the main thing that I would say is to ruffle some feathers one last time before I is that there are a lot of forces and agendas and entities at play that are trying to, what's the word, manipulate, brainwash, and shame you out of a lot of natural desires that you have that can very simply be like, it's not that the journey there isn't deep, but it is like simple sometimes. There are a lot of like agendas out there that are trying to almost like divert your attention away from a lot of natural desires, because when you fulfill natural desires, you have so much power and potency, which there are a lot of people who don't want that to be the way. There are a lot of like systems that don't want you to feel like you can self-source. So one thing I would just say is like be very critical about everything that you hear and like tune in with your body with how it actually like does it resonate truly like in your
Mm.
soul. And are you just picking up on something because it's the trend? Are you just picking up on it because if you thought a different way, maybe your friends would be like, what the hell are you thinking? Yeah, tune into like, does something have deep resonance like with you, literally like in your body? I think that that is so important. And if there is stuff like along the way, especially if we're speaking about like the feminine and the masculine
Mm.
dynamics, that like triggers you, like sit with why. Because a trigger is good to work with when it has a push-pull element to it. And what I mean by this is like, I'm kind of repulsed, but like, I want to know more. Or like, please don't, I don't think I like that. Oh, but like, I'm so interested. Why can't I stop thinking about this? That
Yeah.
energy around like any idea is a very like powerful energy to be in. And I think that that really applies when we speak to these teachings. So yeah, don't be like shameful of natural desires. And there are a lot of, I suppose, very like natural blueprints that are coded in your body, and they're not so complicated to like wake up again. You don't need to go do this like 15-step like regime to awaken your like feminine energy. It's actually quite simple, but like have the right people to take you there is what I would say. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, Paige. I love how I can just throw you the most abstract and slightly badly worded questions and you come up with that. Honestly, I feel like that is the perfect place to close. So thank you
Yes.
so much for being my first ever guest. So
Thank you
exciting.
so much for having me. It's been so much fun. I've loved this so much. And yeah,
Yes.
it's felt like a bit of an
Right.
initiation for me because I haven't really spoken about these teachings that publicly very often. So yeah, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to do this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, of course, of course. So, where can everyone find you? Because I'm sure everyone needs to go and follow you straight away.
Thanks. So my Instagram is probably the best place to find me, which is just at paige.radice, which I'm sure will be in the show notes. And then I also have a podcast called The Soul Led Life, which you can just search up on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or really anywhere that you listen. On there, I speak about things related to this: feminine teachings, magnetism, life design, devotion, spirituality, like so many topics. So feel free to go there. I also just like love on Instagram having conversations with people in the DMs about, whether you agree with me or you don't. I just think open discourse that's truly like
Mm.
non-judgmental is such like a cure to so much like tension in society. So if there's anything you want to dive deeper into, my DMs are always open, and my voice notes, because I use them all the time and it's so much fun. Instagram and the podcast, I would say.
Stunning. I love that. Thank you so much, Paige. And
Thanks.
yeah, go and embrace the rest of your day.
Amazing.
Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I really hoped you enjoyed my discussion with Paige. If you did, remember to leave a comment or a good review depending on what platform you're on. You can always reach out to me on TikTok or Instagram if you're keen for a chat. My handle is at Embrace the Community. I'd love to talk to anyone who's keen. Now, I hope you too can go out and embrace the rest of your day, and we'll see you in the next episode.